Last Friday, 29th of September 2023, Minister of Finance and National Planning Tumbekom Sokotwani presented the 2024 national budget in Parliament, which takes effect from January of 2024. On this special interview, we critically discuss and analyze the contents of the 2024 budget. My name is Paul Shingongo. I'm your host, coming to you live from our mass media studios right here in the capital city, Lusaka. Remember, we're live on channel 279 on DSTV, also live on channel 27 on GoTV, as well as 102 on the Top Star decoder. Also streaming this live on Facebook, that's KBN TV. We do want to get interactive with you. There's a number that will be on your screen. You can use that to send us an SMS questions, and we'll be glad to respond. Joining me for this special interview is Leah Tembo. She's acting head of research and analysis from the Policy Monitoring and Research Center. Also, Ikawongo Muya, research associate from PMRC. Leah and Mr. Muya, it's a pleasure having you on KBN TV. Welcome home.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you for having us. And good afternoon, viewers.
It's good to have you back. Awesome. Without, first of all, for the avoidance of doubt, it will be important for the viewers to understand what exactly the Policy Monitoring and Research Center is all about. Help us understand what is PMRC, what does it stand for, and your primary mandate as an institution. Maybe Leah, you can take that up.
All right, Paul. So Policy Monitoring and Research Center is a public policy think tank that's gazetted under the Ministry of Finance and National Planning. So it's been in inception since 2012, and particularly we try to unlock Zambia's potential. So even as well, we're looking at the budget theme of saying unlocking economic potential, we're actually quite elated as an institution to think that this is actually something that we do, but not at the level of government. And so PMRC actually has 4 thematic areas in which we operate. So we have economic development, we have natural resource environment, we also have social and human development, and the last one is on governance. So part of our aims or our mandate is to promote public understanding through research and education, which we do through policy analysis, as well as the research works that we do. Then also just to talk about how we disseminate our findings, we use various platforms. So we use some booklets. We also use some infographics, which are basically one-pager documents that seek to simplify a complex phenomenon. So the way we have the 2024 national budget, we've actually produced a one-pager infographic where you can find the resource envelope, how government is going to finance the budget, also looking at expenditure by functions, as well as key highlights within the budget in line with the thematic areas of the budget. Yes.
Awesome. Based on what you've said, are we making progress in ensuring that some of the ordinary citizens, ordinary Zambians, do understand the various policies that government has put in place? I'm glad you try to break it down to the people so they're able to understand and assimilate it. Are we making progress in that? Because I think that's one of the complaints that has been coming from various general citizenry is that these GDP, the graphs, they don't understand these things.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any improvement in that regard.
So with regards to that, maybe just giving an example of the budget, there will be the citizens' budget, which tries to simplify the budget and also use better terms, the use of cartoons and other illustrations that will be easier for the general public to understand. And it's also something that we do as PMRC. We try by all means to ensure that we do reach out to the majority of Zambians. We also try to have our information easily accessible by persons with disabilities. So we also translate some of our information into Braille. So with regards to government policies, I think depending on the line ministries, they've got various communication strategies that they have. And they also try to ensure the inclusion of people, but we also do not to say that there is need for vast public awareness as well as sensitization. And even for us as PMRC, we try to also bridge that gap in the way we disseminate our information through the use of Braille. We also use animations, where we also use vernacular in our animations. We also use cartoons as well, of just trying to improve visibility and also accessibility by all forms of society.
Awesome. Before we get into the various sectors, which I really want us to focus on in terms of the contents and the impact of the various issues that have been raised in the 2024 national budget, I would want to hear from you whether you feel whether this budget does inspire confidence especially with a bias towards it being able to address the economic challenges that the ordinary citizens are facing. Do you feel that the budget has given that kind of hope to the Zambians?
Okay, so before I just get into the actual aspect of the question, I also just try to begin by looking at the various challenges that we're facing as a country. The first is that of the high cost of living. Of course, we have noted from the JCTR basic needs and food basket that a family of 5 actually spend about 9,200 kwacha, which is quite high for most general Zambians. And also to look at the poverty rates that according to the recent living conditions survey, it actually shows that there's been an increase in poverty from 54% to about 60%, and rural poverty is actually at 78.8%, whereas urban poverty is about 31.9% of people in urban areas actually poor. So now coming to this, the factors that have led to such statistics, firstly, on the high cost of living, of course, we've seen an increase in commodity prices such as meal, fuel, among others. And of course, we're also struggling with inflation. Of course, we do note that the Ministry of Finance has put one of the macroeconomic objectives, even in the budget, to maintain inflation between 6 to 8%. But as it is, we're currently at 12%, which has also increased, has also led to that. So in order for us to mitigate some of these challenges, there's need for us to industrialize and also invest in economic sectors such as agriculture, mining, tourism, as well as manufacturing. And I think for tourism, it's actually one of the low-hanging fruits, because as it is, Zambia is actually perceived as being a high-cost destination. So in order for us to facilitate players within the tourism industry, we would need to ensure that the cost of doing business is actually reduced. And of course, in the 2023 budget, we saw government actually piloting the single licensing to Livingston, where all these licenses, people in the tourism sector have various licenses. So with regards to that, there'll be a one-stop shop where people can actually attend all the licenses, be it fire, be it health, beer licensing, as well as other licenses, which has also helped reduce cost of doing business by 50%. So even for us, in our budget expectations, we're actually hoping to see that being actually rolled over to all tourism destinations, but it was quite silent with regards to that. But I think that's one of the things that government can do, as well as improve on industrialization, which will also bring in more job creation. But nevertheless, the budget has touched on that. So there are various sectors where government has increased funding, the one of which is the agriculture sector. And we do note to say that agriculture actually employs a majority of the Zambians, and even in the rural areas, most people actually rely on agriculture, although it's rain-fed, which is quite also non-resilient to climate change. So there are aspects of improving that. Government has mentioned the issue of improving irrigation through the construction of dams. There's also the comprehensive agriculture support program, which will be launched sometime this year. That also helps to improve productivity. Then in the mining sector, there's the countrywide geospatial survey that's going to be conducted, and of course with that will come increase in mining exploration as well as exploitation. So we're hoping to see that this will actually improve economic activities, which will also trickle down to various aspects of job creation, and also maybe creating an environment that will address the challenges that we're facing as a country.
You've touched on very key matters, especially pertaining to agriculture, and I'll come back to you, Leah, on that. But just before then, you also mentioned something very important, which I want Mr. Mwangi to tackle, is the issue of the industrial yards. She's highlighted in brief, but we've seen that government has indicated through the budget that it will construct industrial yards in Kitwe, in Lusaka, and in Ndola before the end of this year. The big question is what is the economic significance of this activity?
Yeah, so like she has highlighted, I think most of the things that you see here is to try and prop up the economy, come out of the debt trap that we have seen, as well as the poverty levels that have been rising, I think we saw from the report that she referred to. So one of the methods of trying to move out of that is to try to identify key areas where we can invest and ensure that we create job opportunities for the youths, especially if you look at places such as Lusaka, Kitwe, and many other places around the line of rail. There's high unemployment among the youths, and they tend to, this is idle labor that we can actually tap into. So the creation of these industrial yards actually creates an opportunity for Zambia to invest into sectors that will employ some of those youths that are actually roaming the streets. So the economic value of it is that it will contribute, first of all, reducing the level of unemployment, as well as trying to ensure that we have other sources of revenue. I think domestic revenue mobilization has been limited, and creating such things, you are enhancing the level of economic activities, and that is another way through which government can actually find resources for.
Have we done this before? Have we had industrials before?
Yes, we've had something
like
similar to
success
that.
stories around this.
Well, we've done something similar to M-First. Those are much more like similar to that, and you see that in a way it's just an extension of such a program. So we want to begin with these few selected areas, but I think in a long term you will see this actually going to other areas. The idea is to see how we can get the most out of what we have on the ground right now.
Great. Coming back to Leah, the agriculture sector is a key sector. The sector has seen an increment from 20.9%, which was 35 million, to 39.7 billion, or 22.3%. FISIP has been allocated 8.6 billion. And remember, FISIP is one of those programs that government has been releasing conflicting statements over, the FISIP and the KASIP. How does this support smallholder farmers and increase agriculture productivity?
Okay. So when coming to the agriculture budget, although we do note to say that we haven't met the Maputo declaration of having at least 10% of the budget going towards the agriculture sector, but we still do note to say that the increase from 6.7% in the 2023 budget to 7.8% in the 2024 budget is actually quite significant, and we do commend government for doing that. And so for that, part of it, or majority of it, is actually going towards the Farmers Input Support Program. Although it has actually been reduced, in 2023 it was at 9.6 billion, and it's now at about 8.6 billion. So the major factors that have led to that reduction, firstly, is looking at the price of inputs. I think fertilizer has actually reduced. We also saw in the budget that the minister actually stated to say that it's been reduced from about 1,200 United States dollars per metric ton to about $850 United States dollars per metric ton. Then the other issue that can also have resulted into this reduction is the migration of 77% of the farmers who are actually on the direct input support program. So the way FISIP is, it's in two folds. The farmers who actually access the inputs through the direct input support, whereas others use the e-voucher. So the e-voucher is more it's electromated, as opposed to the direct input support, which has a lot of administrative costs, and also doesn't have the diversification factor as the farmers on the e-voucher. So I think going forward, we'd like to see 100% migration of all farmers on the e-voucher, which is more cost effective and also reduces the cost of the FISIP implementation. But nevertheless, that will help to improve the productivity of small-scale farmers, in being that they will have at least access these subsidies with regards to their inputs. As we know that agriculture is actually quite input-oriented. So for that, the farmers will actually access inputs such as fertilizer as well as certified seeds, which also helps in reducing the cost of production. And we also noted to say that government is actually trying to launch the comprehensive Agriculture Transformation Support Program, the KASIP. And so for this program, it's more like the FISIP, but it not only looks at providing inputs to the farmers, but it also provides issues such as irrigation, extension services, as well as access to credit. And also in the 2024 budget, we've actually seen that government has set aside a credit window that will actually provide financing for small-scale farmers, and at least they can have credit, which can also be put as capital into being more productive and also enhance the productivity.
This wasn't there in this year?
So in the 2023 budget, that the credit facility wasn't there, but in the 2024 budget, it's actually one of the highlights with regards to the agriculture sector. Yes, and we also have seen the issue of farm blocks development. We've seen that government intends to construct about 300 kilometers of roads within the operation of farm blocks, as well as 200 kilometers of power lines. So that will also help to enhance productivity within those farm blocks, which will also trickle down to the small and small-scale farmers. So there there are some incentives that are aimed at increasing productivity for small-scale farmers that have been enshrined within the 2024 budget. Awesome.
Just before I get to Mr. Muya, the minister also indicated that apart from producing fertilizer locally, FRA will now be releasing stocks of maize directly into the communities. What does this mean exactly, and what difference will it make, especially in the quest to solving the multiple problems that encompass the sector?
Yeah. So for FRA, I think the move was mainly to, it is what actually reflects prices. So if we do reduce cost of production, then we can reduce the price. But we're yet to see on how that will also pan out. And of course, if we do try and maybe limit the briefcase buyers and see how best we can try and make our the purchasing of products more competitive compared to selling outside of the country.
Guests are just joining us. This is a special interview where we'll look at the 2024 post-budget analysis live from our mass media studios right here in the capital city, Lusaka. My guest this afternoon, Leah Tembo, Acting Head of Research and Analysis from the Policy Monitoring and Research Center. Also, Ikawongo Muya, Research Associate, equally from PMRC. We do want to get interactive with you on the program this afternoon. There's a number on your screen. You can use that to send us an SMS. You can either contribute or ask a question, and shortly we'll be glad to also hear from you. Also live on Facebook, that's KBN TV. You can go there, go in the comment section and drop in your contributions. Later on the program, we shall also get to that and respond to some of those contributions. Get into something, Mr. Muya, that is very interesting, especially to the Zambians, CDF. You know, CDF is an interesting subject to everyone, not just the people in the rural areas, but even us here in the urban areas. Coming to CDF and its management, we saw that there was an increase in CDF from 25.7 million in 2022 to 28.3 million in 2023. This, as we saw from the budget, has been further increased to 30.6 million in 2024. Firstly, I think a number of questions have arisen from these. How much on average has been disbursed in the constituencies for this year? Because some are saying, why are you increasing when you've not even managed to disperse what you had indicated in 2023? But maybe Zambians don't even know how much has been dispersed. I don't know whether you would be in a position to know from your research which constituency has received maybe up to 100% or 75% of the allocated 28.3 that was there. Or do you have any constituency that has received anything less than 50% of what was allocated? And also, as a rider to that, is increasing the allocation for 2024 the best decision?
So I'll begin with the last question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah, so we see that CDF has been changing anyway in terms of the values that are displaced. Initially, the previous government, we had less than 2 million, and of course it has been increasing over time. And the past 2 years, we have seen it actually move up to where it is today. The benefits to the people on the ground is actually overwhelming. It's just that probably some of the effects may not be they may not be easy to see today, but the outcome will actually start to manifest in the medium term and the long term. And I think people on the ground appreciate, from many studies that we've undertaken, that the CDF increase actually has made them have access to some of the resources that they never had initially. If you go to any council now, you find they are laden with equipment that are used for for what is needed in the communities, like drilling of boreholes, grading of roads, and many other areas. So this is one of the things that you see. Also sponsorship in terms of individuals accessing loans and so on. So there are so many benefits that come with the increase in CDF. And also, if you see, as a country, we have been on the path to try and decentralize, to move away from things that being done centrally. We want to empower more of the local people so that the decisions come from them. If you see, what has been happening in the past is that we have the central government making decisions on behalf of the local government, and most of that is because funding was limited for the local government. But this move in itself has actually seen that change over time, and development will start being realized from that level. you know the projects that are there in your area, so you implement those projects, not coming from the central government. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. So in terms of the amounts that are being dispersed to these local areas, of course there has been a challenge. This has actually been reported. But as you may see also, as it was reviewed on Friday by the minister, it was mentioned that this policy is going to be reviewed. So some of the challenges that are coming with the transfers of money from the central to the local government are coming because of the nature of the policy itself, and it will be reviewed so that it becomes more and more efficient in terms of even the transfer of funds. So yes, of course, there has been a very high level in terms of not having the full value actually. So what is reported is so much, and what you actually have at your local level is less, or maybe even half of what you anticipated. So these are the challenges that we have seen. And like I've also mentioned, we are trying to work, of course, government is trying to work around that to ensure that the policy is reviewed so that people can start to receive. And once these funds are in these areas, they don't need to be remitted back to the state at the end of the fiscal year. So those are some of the changes that will actually come. And we also would like to see more transparency, especially on the people that are, managing these funds. We have also seen issues to do with capacity, financial capacity to manage large sums of money, and most of the local authorities haven't been able to adequately manage that. So with the changes that are being proposed now, I think we should be able to see that come to an end.
The big question, Mr. Muya, the big question is, I don't know whether you might have this information, either yourself, Leah, or maybe the public could help us with answers to this. How much can we say, what's the highest that any constituency has received from the 28 million? Because sometimes we don't want to believe politicians who say that no constituency has received anything more than 10 million from the 28 million that is allocated to them. Maybe they're politicking, we don't know. But maybe from research, people like yourselves, you can help us.
Well, I'll mention it in terms of percentages. Of course, the majority are reporting around 60% in terms
60%.
Of how much they've received. And some are reporting as high as 25 and sometimes even lower. But the transmission of the funds depends on the activities that you have on the ground. So sometimes you have to, you apply for certain projects and you find the funding is so much, that's what is approved by the council. And you have that is what you expect to be funded. And if it's not reaching up to the budget, that's why these funds tend to be remitted back to the state. And I think one of the revisions that are being proposed is these funds should stay there and continue to develop those communities. I know Leah is going to try and amplify that for me.
Yes, so just as he has alluded, I think most of the times when you're looking at the procurement process in government, I think that's also one of the issues that's going to be tackled in the Procurement Act, as well as other policies that actually try to hinder or maybe provide more bureaucracy with regards to that. So the way it is, the councils would have their integrated development plans that are put forward, which will list the activities as well as what is needed. So from the council level, when they put up that project submission, it has to be approved. And if it's a large quantity of money, obviously the authorizing authority isn't at council level. So that's what would have actually been limiting. So once certain projects are authorized, that's when you see the disbursements of funds. So maybe some of these things that were actually hindering the process was the issues to do with procurement. And I think government has also put in forth the review of various legislation aimed at bridging those gaps.
Awesome. It'll be good to hear what the viewers also have to say on this. But I know you've tackled on a number of gaps that you feel that are there, especially when it comes to the implementation and management of CDF. What would you have hoped to see the budget talk about, especially when it comes to some of these issues that CDF has come with?
Okay. So as it is right now, I think there's still need for clarity in terms of the avenues, how the money will flow up to the to the people that is intended to go to. But some of the things that we have not seen in the budget, I think, is the clear outline of how much the local authority has in terms of the mandate to administer. Because even if you have the projects there still has to be another way to come back to the higher authority to be able to get the approval to undertake some of those projects. So we are talking about, if you are trying to decentralize, then you should be able to give more mandate to the people on the ground, so that some of the projects that are approved, because they know, then those are the ones that are approved and are funded to ensure that the communities achieve what they want. But we cannot really exhaust all the challenges. There are still a lot of technical challenges within the process itself. I think one of the issues that we mentioned was that it's still under review, and I think something is proposed for next year. I think some of those issues will come, and this is the first time it has been rolled out, and I'm sure as we review and make it better, we should be able to get the best out of it.
Awesome. I'll come back to you. Leah, the education sector has seen an increment of about 15.4%, which is 27.3 billion from 13.9%, which was 23.9 billion. How does this massive change in terms of allocation improve access to quality education in rural areas? Remember, a statement was released, very saddening statement, was released by Minister of Education about a week ago on the number of students who sat and failed the GCE, that is the General Certificate Examinations. Only 2,811 out of 20,630 candidates who sat obtained full school certificates. 2,000 out of 20,000. What, first of all, could be the real problem behind this? And would the proposed increased allocations possibly help solve this problem?
Okay. So with regards to the increase within the education sector, some of the pronouncements that were made was that part of the budget is actually going to go towards the construction of more schools, as well as the recruitment of teachers. So we have seen governments, the way government has actually prioritized education, and also the free education policy. Of course, in order for us to implement that policy, we also need funds that will go towards that. So those are some of the avenues that will actually stand to benefit. But one of the challenges that we face or that we see as PMRC is that children with special education needs, or maybe children with disabilities, are not really considered with regards to such. As it is, there's one school for every 400 children without disabilities, and yet there's one school for every 2,300 students with disabilities. So we're hoping that part of that allocation that's going towards the construction of schools can also go towards the annexing of special units within the schools. As it is, government is trying to integrate children with disabilities with those without disabilities.
Sorry, Leah, you've raised a very important matter which I want you to repeat.
Yes.
There's one school
for every 400 children without disabilities, whereas there's one school for every 2,300 children with disabilities. So that shows that we actually are not providing as much to encompass the children with disabilities. And yes, so even for that, we also, maybe the part of the money can also go towards the rehabilitation of infrastructure, because you do not to say that children with disabilities, maybe physical disabilities, would actually have a challenge. So we need to ensure that those schools have ramps as well as accessible ablution blocks. So those are some of the areas that we also want to see a vast inclusion of persons with disabilities within the education sector, the construction of schools, and also for the education, which is also contributing to the low pass rates. So what we need to do is intensify with regards to infrastructure to ensure that there's a school in every close kilometer radius to the proximity of children. We also ensure that the staffing is also ideal to meet the needs and the demands for the pupils out there, and maybe we can actually see more more higher percentage of those passing as opposed to the saddening statistics that you've just given.
Do you feel, as you're explaining, I'm trying to think, COVID could have played a role?
Yes, COVID did play a role, especially with regards to the time when children had to use electronic means. There was what we call the e-learning. Most of the children could not even access e-learning. So even just looking at in terms of maybe just the rural areas, you'd find that the rural electrification is actually quite low compared to urban areas. So how would people even access such if they do not have access to power? So those are things that we actually need to look in, investments in rural electrification, as well as providing of these ICT materials, because we do know to say that some of these children do not have access to ICTs. And of course, the closure that was there has also worsened the situation, because there was that gap where children are not actually learning. So there was also some kind of knowledge drain that was there, and the time that they spent at home was actually quite long. And you know, for some, if you also don't find like parents are actually also just trying to continuously give work to the pupils, that would also pose as a challenge. I think that's what was also led to the low pass rates.
Mr. Muya, again, talking about statistics, talking about worrying statistics. We saw Zamstats releasing official statistics on poverty, indicating 60% of the population is poor. Some of those statistics, I think Liad alluded to them earlier. From 54% in 2015, rural poverty is now at 78.8% from 76.6%. Urban poverty rose to 32% from 23%. What has the budget spoken to as a way of addressing these worrying statistics? Because that's what some of the people want to see as a direct measure to ensure that these statistics go down. I think it is very worrying to know that more than half of the country's population can't afford basic needs.
Well, these statistics are actually reflective of what is actually happening now. And from what you see, in 2015 we had a lower, and now we have a higher rate, which is, of course, we are coming from issues to do with the COVID that my colleague mentioned. We also talk about the war in Russia, but these are external factors. Internally also here, we have seen a number of issues change. I think much of what has been spoken is to do with the cost of living in Zambia. We have seen inflation rise and so on, and many other aspects. The budget in itself has tried to create an environment where some of these issues can begin to be tackled. We have seen a situation where the budget, for instance, maybe I'm preempting this, but what we saw last week being mentioned is the fact that the lower cap has been increased for pay as you earn. And the upper cap, of course, also has been knocked down by 0.5%. Now, if you look at every economy, the main drive in terms of spending is actually people in the middle class. And this move in itself actually targets that. And if we begin to empower people in the middle class, then this should trickle down to the people. So you want to ensure that people in the middle class do not trickle down to lower class. So you want to create an environment where these can actually begin to have more savings, more investment to move them up to the upper class. And also you want the lower class to also move to middle class. So I think in a way the budget is trying to make such strides to move the people in the middle class to upper class. Of course it will take time to realize, but I think the adjustment in income tax is one of the indicators that we have seen from the budget. Another one is the issue that we can circle back to, the CDF. To target the people on the ground, you need to ensure that they have economic activities, and bringing economic activities to them through CDF is one of the measures. We hope that issues around, or these challenges that we have talked about surrounding CDF, can be ironed out so that people can realize the full potential. It is a tool that, with the increase in funding, each Zambian has access to, to these funds, these economic activities that are happening in their communities, and especially the youths. You can actually take advantage of that. So we are talking about many other areas. We talk about mining, we talk about agriculture. All these are ways through which the budget is addressing the issue of poverty. Yes.
Great. Still with you, Mr. Muya, the mining sector has been allocated 160 million for geological mapping to support exploration, something that Leah also talked about. What measures are in place to promote responsible and sustainable mining practices while ensuring that we maximize revenue from the mining sector?
So the allocation is actually a good indication, of course, and I hope much of it will go towards the local miners, the artisanal miners. Much of the emphasis in the past has been on the large-scale miners, And you see these mining firms being given incentives. Of course, they hire much of the population, especially in the mining towns. You see much of the population being given those job opportunities. But we also have another growing, potentially viable business from the artisanal or the small-scale miners. And we hope that much of that will actually go towards ensuring that most of them are formalized. They know about the health and safety issues surrounding mining, and they can start contributing to our national income. Yes. So these are some of the things that we see. And as much as I have mentioned this, I think I would like to say it again. Like you mentioned, if we start to explore, we don't know most of the resources that we have. And some funding that has gone towards exploration will actually help us now know where our minerals are. We map out all these minerals so that we can begin to see how we can harness that potential we have in the mining sector, especially growing the small-scale miners into medium or large-scale mining. And most of these are indigenous, so we want that to come out as much as possible.
There's a notion that most of the policies, most of the stance and position that government takes does not seem to support the local players in the mining sector.
Well, I think that has been the case for a long time, but I have to say that there has been a change, and there has been some emphasis on how do we harness the potential, how do we leverage from the small-scale mining firms, how do we formalize them, because most of them just operate, they don't even know what they mine. Sometimes you get this product and sell it at less than half the market price. So, like Uganda has done it, and many other Eastern African countries, and many other, of course, beyond that, tried to ensure that the government can actually organize these small-scale miners and create policies that govern them and facilitate their formalization so that they begin to contribute equally to.
Have we seen any incentives that have been put in place in this sector that promote mining firms to operate profitably in the country? Has the budget spoken to some of these incentives?
Well, like you said, we have to always address this question in two ways. We have to talk about the large ones. Of course, those ones are always,
they seem to always be favored.
Yeah, they seem to always be that way. But
is that the case? They seem to always be favored.
Well, that's seem. We say what we see. But in reality, there is also a move to try and incorporate the small-scale miners. And incorporating small-scale miners actually means you are actually broadening the potential in terms of revenue. You highlighted the issue of revenue. So if we registered, we formalize all these small-scale miners, you can imagine how much revenue the government would get from them. And in a way, we have seen that government is actually working on certain regulations that will actually incorporate this into being part of the mainstream.
Coming to you, Leah, the health sector, a very important sector as well, very key to the national development of the country. We've seen an increment from 10.4% to 11.8%, which is about 17.4 billion to 20.91 billion. 1.4 billion will go towards healthcare infrastructure. How does this investment in new healthcare infrastructure assist, one, in disease prevention and control, especially, first of all, in the context of public health emergencies?
Okay, so with regards to the health sector, I think I must mention to say, like, when you're looking at Zambia's demographic transition, we are still battling with infectious diseases as well as waterborne diseases that emanate as a result of poor sanitation, as opposed to other developed nations where they just have non-communicable diseases like diabetes, cancer, and maybe just other diseases as well. So that also poses a strain on our health budget, because we are also fighting things that people, maybe other countries, were fighting in the early 1950s, and they've been able to put up measures to prevent all that. So coming on to our health system, it's very important that we put above preventive measures as well as just developing our health infrastructure in general. As it is, maybe just also looking at specialized treatment, we do note to say that we're actually quite lacking here in Zambia. That's why you see that part of the health bill actually goes towards government providing specialized treatment for patients abroad. And so in order for, if we are to actually try and improve on our health, our infrastructure, also bring in equipments that will be able to cater some of these specialized treatments that might be needed, we'll also reduce on the strain from government, and also maybe just set ourselves as Zambia being a health hub, the way that South Africa, Egypt, and India are. So, you know, the way it's also one form of tourism, it's called health tourism. So if we do harness our infrastructure, we invest more in infrastructure, we can also try and tap into the health tourism, showing the more people that come here for specialized treatment, and we can also actually enhance our resource mobilization through such platforms. But when it comes to maybe preparedness for some pandemic, I think the COVID-19 pandemic actually showed that Zambia is not prepared for pandemics as well as any other diseases that might come there, and we're just like we're blessed to not have many casualties with regards to COVID-19 the way other countries were hit. And so it's also important with that we actually need to position ourselves for future pandemics. We need to prepare our health system, so we need more investment towards the health infrastructure in order to actually look into the challenges that we face.
Yes. Just picking on this also, I think one of the concerns that has been coming in the health sector is the issue of shortages of drugs. I don't know whether the budget has spoken to that and how they plan to address that. I'm sure we know what was happening. Minister of Health was going around the country, and this problem is serious.
Yes,
has
exactly.
the budget addressed this?
Yes, it has. Most of the challenges that were emulating towards the shortage of drugs was issues to do with procurement, which I actually alluded to. You know, the procurement process can be quite tedious and quite, you need to have various segments of approval. And previously with the centralized system, you'd find that maybe there's a health center, for instance, maybe in Vubwi would actually apply for medication, but they would have to wait for the entire Eastern Province to bring up their applications for medication. And so maybe that procurement process was also it was actually also resulting in limited medical stores, medicine in the health facilities. But with the decentralization and also devolution of certain functions to local authorities, we will see an improvement with regards to medical or medicine, procurement of medicine. And also speaking back in the aspect of the Public Procurement Act, also trying to see how that can be reviewed in order to actually help bridge the gaps that are being faced with regards to the shortage of medication. It's purely as a result of the procurement system as well as the nitty-gritties of the procurement systems which have to be looked into.
When we talk about, I don't know whether this makes sense or not, especially to the Zambians, especially to a layperson, when we talk about various acts that are being proposed to be amended, worked on, isn't this like an excuse? Don't you feel like it's an excuse? Because he talked about, for example, the law regarding CDF, the policies around that are being proposed to be changed. Look at the Procurement Act as well. Previously, we had these laws, and possibly maybe in some sectors we never used to have this kind of problems. So why is it not this act now is a cause for this problem?
Well, so when you're looking at it in terms of policy, the policy, there's the legal aspect as well as the policies. The legal, we're looking at acts as well as the policies. And the way it is as a country, we do have what is called, I will just give an example, the 8th National Development Plan. Under the 8th National Development Plans, there are various programs that have been enshrined. And in order for us to actually implement those programs, we need to come up with strategies. And those are what are also found within various policies. So there isn't one policy that might fit all. So there are various pieces of legislation, various pieces of policies that actually feed into the main goal of us maybe being a prosperous middle-income country. So when you're looking at it in terms of acts, there are times when you're looking at the situational analysis back in 2000, it's different from the situational analysis that is there now. And so there are various segments that might change, demographics and other aspects. That's why there's the need for continuous review of policies. So that I think is actually quite cardinal, but we can actually look at the hastening the reviewer process. We make it in a way that it does not derail development. But them alone having policies and pieces of legislation are actually quite critical for our implementation of various strategies and programs.
Great. I want, as we prepare to close the program, Mr. Moya, I would want you to speak on the issue of debt. I think very important. But before I come to you, Leah, there's also, we've seen social protection funding going up from 8.1 billion to 9.92 billion. How will this impact the general citizenry?
Okay, so the increase in social protection, social protection is more of a mechanism of safeguarding the livelihoods of the most vulnerable in society. So looking at the age, persons with disabilities, or maybe houses in destitution, and maybe houses also where they are child-headed households that cannot actually provide or fend for themselves. So even looking at the cost of living as well as the high poverty rates, it's actually quite imperative that increase should have come, and we're actually anticipating more with regards to that in order to create more social safety nets that will safeguard the livelihoods of people. So as going forward for the increments, it wasn't quite clearly stated within the budget how that increment is going to be, whether they're going to be more beneficiaries that are going to be targeted. But from the look of things, I'm actually foreseeing maybe an annual review of the beneficiary amount, as it is persons under the social protection or maybe the social cash transfer get 200 kwacha, which is paid by monthly, that's 400. Then persons with disabilities get 400, which is paid by monthly, which amounts to 800. So looking at the high inflation cost and also the increase in cost of living, increase in commodity prices, that the increment might actually go towards maybe trying to review that amount and maybe just provide an increase to make sure that people actually have the means to access basic needs. Yes.
So the persons with disabilities get 800, because that's 400 kwacha by monthly. Then
yes.
the other 200 kwacha, that's 400 kwacha per month. Still with you, Leah, with over 1.37 million beneficiaries on this SCT social cash transfer program, what measures would you recommend are taken to ensure efficient and equitable distribution of these resources, especially now that we've seen an increased allocation to this sector?
Okay, the first one, just trying to, what I've already touched on, is to review the transfer amount to ensure that it's reflective of inflation. So maybe that can also be one of the recommendations, which is actually the main recommendations that we have going forward, to review that amount to actually increase it.
What would be your proposal?
So by proposal, the thing about the social cash transfer, for us, for some people, it might be, if the amount might seem to be quite small, but it's quite significant with regards to the beneficiaries, because we've actually seen that amount has led to people even accessing more meals per day, to 2, maybe 3 meals per day. They've actually developed from grass thatched houses. They've actually procured steel roofs for their housing. So it might look as though it's quite small, but it's quite substantial. And also in the communities where those people are, it has also got a trickle-down effect, because others are starting businesses and slowly trying to create more economic activities within the businesses. But if I was to say, I would actually say that there's need to actually increase that amount. I don't know the type of mechanism that the Ministry of Community Development does with regards to the annual, to reviewing, to create that putting in the issue of inflation. So I wouldn't be quite, I might be too biased and say something that might also not be something that is sustainable. So for that, maybe I just leave it as no comment, and we'll leave the technocrats to actually come up with something that might be viable and sustainable.
Mr. Moya, if it was you're being asked by government, advise us how much should we add from the 400 kwacha they get monthly and the 800 kwacha which the people with disabilities get, how much would you prefer they get?
Well, as it is, you can see that, of course, from the side of cash transfer, of course, there is a challenge. But this is a very sustainable amount of people with certain disabilities. They may have completely nothing, but they have something to hold on to. But also, that is something that I can say in that regard. But look at, as it is also, the average wage is about 3,500 to 4,000 kwacha. And the cost for a family of 5 is about 9. So you look at all these dynamics. People always find a way to move around these challenges. But we're not saying this is adequate. But of course, there has to be a need to probably rethink and adjust.
You also, you don't have to mention figures.
Usually your figures, because at times we might use our emotions.
Yeah.
Also talking from the point like maybe things that we have actually seen, the challenges that are being faced, and also just looking at it in terms of the price of bag of meal, it's actually fetching average 300 kwacha. So those are things that you could consider and maybe just say there should be an increment. But even as we are proposing this increment, we also need to look at the sustainability of that. Exactly. So maybe as opposed to having the cash transfers, we can also look at empowerment programs. But one of the ways in which government is actually trying to mitigate the low amount, the cash transfer, is to also have other programs. They call it cash plus programs. So they would find someone who's on a social cash transfer, who's also on the dual program, and maybe others who are also on the food security pack, as a way of just trying to bridge the gap that is already there. So there are various programs that target the same people who are under the social cash transfer as a way of trying to increase the support that they get from government.
I know my time is up. Maybe my last question each to you, maybe under 2 minutes before the director comes to fetch us out from this room. The issues of debt, Mr. Muya, out of Zambia's $13.9 billion external debt, 6.3 billion was restructured. We were aware, Zambians were excited. What has been proposed in the budget, or maybe in the annual borrowing plan, that speaks into addressing the other external debt to private lenders?
Strikes are being made, of course, to try and, it's easier to communicate country to country. You can easily negotiate. This is why it has been, I think, like I mentioned, in June, somewhere thereabouts, we saw that change. So it's easier to engage at country level. But when it comes to, so I'm talking about bilateral lenders, but when it comes to commercial lenders or these private sector lenders, it's quite interesting that you may have to identify them, and of course we know them, and then you engage with them at a different level compared to the national, nation-to-nation negotiation. As it is, well, the budget has done quite a lot, I think, in terms of trying to ensure that we borrow according to a certain set plan. I think that is one thing we have seen. We are trying to maintain a fiscal space that is supportive of the repayment of the debt. And also, we have seen government not, just extending its budget just because they could, because they have that mandate, but they've tried to limit their spending so that some of the funds can go towards, the repayment of the debt. So I think that in a way, the budget in itself has done quite an excellent job to try and limit borrowing as well as spending that is beyond our capacity.
Awesome. Lastly, as we wrap up under a minute or so, Leah, what measures has the budget spoken to that can help stimulate economic growth and job creation? I think also this marries well with the fact that when we look at the poverty statistics that were released by ZAMSTAS, one of the things we can clearly see is that there's a lot of urbanization that is taking place. People are moving from the rural areas, coming to the Saka, thinking there's milk and honey, but when they come, they are actually just finding and suffering just the way they were when they were in the village. But what has the budget spoken to that can help stimulate job creation?
Okay, so in terms of that, we can look at it in terms of the key drivers of the economy. The budget has actually touched on those issues to do with agriculture. There are some measures within the mining sector, tourism, as well as manufacturing, and also for enablers of development such as energy. We've seen that in the budget, government has actually put aside money trying to, as a way of improving the country's energy mix. So they're going to be investing in geothermal energy, which is actually quite important, given the fact that we really rely on hydro electricity, which is quite it's not climate resilient. And also looking at the issues to do with climate change, we also need to improve on our energy mix. But I think in issues to do with agriculture, I've touched on what government is doing. There's development or increase in farm block development. There's issues to do with animal and disease control. Also the implementation of the CASIP program. Then under the tourism sector, we've seen that government is going to establish the tourism satellite account, which is also going to provide more data with regards to the tourism sector, as well as its contribution towards towards the economy. So what we want to see is just the effective implementation of the budget lines with regards to the economic drivers, because that's also going to trickle down to providing more job creation and also industrialization, because with that will facilitate more economic growth, which will also facilitate more growth, as well as creating an enabling environment for reducing the cost of doing business. We'll find more players coming in, and also access to credit, because that's also something that's quite critical. So we've also seen with regards to the farmers, there's the credit window that is there for farmers. We also want to see more credit opportunities within other sectors, so as to stimulate growth and therefore stimulate job creation.
Leah Tembo, thank you so much for finding time to come through this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for finding time to come through home.
Thank you.
That's where we wrap up this special interview, 2024 post-budget analysis. Leah Tembo, Acting Head of Research and Analysis, Ikabongo Muya, Research Associate, both from the Policy Monitoring and Research Center. Thank you so much for finding time to watch this special interview on behalf of the entire production crew. My producer for this show was Chiti Kawa. Being your host, Portion Gongo. Keep watching KBN TV.
Thank you.